Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. For those who don't know me, I'm Darlene McLennan, and I'm the manager of the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training, ADCET for short. My pronouns are she and her. I am a white woman in my mid-50s with grey, probably more grey hair than brown hair, with glasses, and I'm wearing a patterned red top. This webinar is being live captioned. To activate the captions, click in the CC button, either at the bottom or top of your screen. And we also have captions available in the browser, and the team will put the URL into the chat box now for people to access if their preferred option is to see them in the browser. ADCET is hosted on Lutruwita, Tasmania, Aboriginal land, and in the spirit of reconciliation, ADCET and myself respectfully acknowledges the Lutruwita nations and also recognise the Aboriginal history and culture of the land. And I want to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to the many Aboriginal people that did not make elder status. I also want to acknowledge all the countries and lands from participants in this meeting, and also acknowledge their elders and ancestors and legacies to us, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us in the webinar. We also ask if those who have been here, and I'm seeing in the chat there's a few already, to acknowledge what lands you are on today. Okay, today's webinar, Unmasking Literacies, a model for developing academic literacy in a neurodiverse enabling classroom, presented by Dr. Angela Jones. This topic will explore critical approaches to new literacy studies, with a particular focus on the importance of neurodivergent literacies. This presentation will share the process for developing a pedagogical approach to developing an academic literacies and skills in a neurodiverse enabling education classroom. Before we make a start, just a couple of more housekeeping details. As we stated, this webinar is being captioned by the wonderful Helen from Bradley Reporting and will be recorded. The recording will be available on ADCET in the coming days. If you do have any difficulties, please email us at admin@adcet.edu.au. And Angela is going to present to us for around 45 to 50 minutes, and then at the end, we'll have some time for questions. Please feel free, as you are already chatting in the chat box. We'd love to see the chat happening and sharing knowledge and resources with each other. But if you have a question for Angela at the end of this presentation, please add that to our Q&A box. That's where we'll manage the questions. And make sure if you're in the chat and the Q&A that you choose all panelists and attendees so we can all participate. Okay, that's it from me. You'll hear from me at the end as well, but it's over to you. Thank you so much, Angela.
Thanks, Darlene, and thank you, ADCET, for having me today. My name is Angela Jones, or otherwise known as Ange. I am a tanned 42-year-old woman with glasses. I'm wearing a black cardigan with polka dots. And I'm located here at Mount Lawley University in Western Australia. Darlene, next, please. So Mount Lawley campus for Edith Cowan University is located on Wajak Noongar Budja. And the image that is on the screen today is of our building on our Joondalup campus, which is also on Noongar Wajak Budja. And Joondalup, the Noongar word for Joondalup is Joondalup, and it means the lake that glistens. So I also would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land that I am presenting on today, the Noongar elders of the Wajak people. And Edith Cowan is committed to reconciliation and recognises and respects the significance of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, communities, cultures and histories This place has always been a country of learning, and I'm very excited to be meeting on the various countries we are meeting on today, and hopefully I can share some of my knowledge and experience of working with neurodivergent students in a neurodivergent classroom and talk through some understandings of literacies today. Next. So I always like to start these presentations with a bit of an overview. So today we're going to be discussing the model for developing literacies in the neurodiverse classroom. So I like to start the presentation with talking through my positionality, the context, which is the enabling space that I work in, the goal of developing a model, and then talk you through the action research project, which led to my creation of a model for developing literacies, particularly academic literacies in a neurodivergent classroom. And then I'll open the floor for some questions. Next. So my positionality statement is one that is focused around awareness, advocacy, and reflection. I think it's always really important when presenting, particularly on these kinds of topics, to understand where I'm coming from and the experience that I have. So I am an academic. I'm an enabling educator. I'm course coordinator of the Uni Prep program here at Cowan University, and previously I was head of discipline and course coordinator for the enabling program at Murdoch University in Western Australia as well. So I have really focused, particularly my enabling career, on developing curriculum and research that's focused on student wellbeing, anxiety, and social and emotional learning. And through this time, I have taught many students with disclosed autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and other neurodivergences, from enabling, but also all the way up to postgraduate studies as well. I have a real passion for creating inclusive environments and making sure that, you know, all brains, all neurotypes, everyone is really supported in my enabling classrooms. And I'll talk you through a little bit about what enabling is for those of you who are not familiar with in a minute. But in terms of my own lived experience, I have ADHD. I grew up in a neurodiverse household. I have a neurotypical mother, although she might argue differently. I have a neurodivergent father and brother with ADHD. I have also a lived experience raising a daughter with anxiety and ADHD for 19 years, almost 20 years now. And I have worked during that time with an autism specialist for 12 years on techniques for communication, engaging, learning, and de-escalation. And as I said, I am an inclusive practitioner who strives to live my ethos. I have an image on the screen here that says the phrase, but I'm not an expert. And that's why I like to frame this positionality of mine, is I do have a lot of experience in creating these inclusive learning environments as an enabling educator, and I do have my own lived experience, but you know, that's by no means that by no means makes me an expert. But this is the angle and the lens for which I am sharing my knowledge and my findings and my trials from teaching in my classroom with you today. Next. So I said I'm an enabling educator and I work in enabling education. For those of you who don't know what enabling education is, they are pre-university programs that help students from underrepresented backgrounds gain entrance into university. And they've really gained traction. They've been around for a very long time, since the 80s, but they've really gained traction in the last 10 to 15 years to provide really bespoke pathways for university, for students from various different kinds of cohorts now. We have in-school enabling programs, we have intense enabling programs, we have online enabling programs across Australia. But they're really part of I guess, a global widening participation strategy to get more students into higher education. But as our students are from underrepresented backgrounds, so these are the government-defined equity groups, as well as first in family, they come with a range of intersectional, compounding, cumulative challenges that can impact their learning and their transition to university. So we know that they often commence with mental health challenges such as anxiety and depression, and the disclosure of neurodivergence is now growing in enabling cohorts across Australia. So as someone who coordinates an enabling program, but I also teach into the enabling program as well, it's my goal to embrace what I refer to as the rainbow, which I will define for you in a little bit, to develop students' academic literacy and self-efficacy for a smooth transition to undergraduate study. Next. So UniPrep is the Edith Cowan enabling pathway. And in terms of our proportion of students with disability, we have had a massive increase, and the graph on the screen shows this increase from 7% in 2018 to 15% in 2023. And within our program and within the university, we have what is referred to as learning access plans for students that will support their learning from enabling all through their undergrad. And what we've found that in these learning access plans, there has been a significant increase in the disclosure of neurodivergence from our students. Next. So what we're finding is that the increase in the students with the learning access plan who have displayed a neurological condition has shifted from 487 in 2021, which is our chart on the side of the screen, to 642 in 2023. And the largest portion of these, in this increase, is students presenting with ADHD in the shift from 2022 to 2023. And this increase is from 375 to 515 respectively. So we're finding that there is a lot of students who are getting late diagnoses, or who are actually getting their diagnoses for ADHD and autism during their uni prep experience as well. So what we find is that they might not have these learning access plans right at the beginning of their learning journey. They might get their diagnosis and get these this added to their learning access plan part the way through their uni prep journey. So uni prep is 4 units that they can complete full-time or part-time. Full-time is over 1 semester, and part-time can be anywhere from say 1 to 4 semesters. Next. And so the context that I wanted to share with you today was of a particular learning skills unit that I taught within uni prep. And this example that I wanted to share with you was one where we had quite a number of students who disclosed their neurodivergence early in the semester, but how I framed my teaching around an understanding of neurodivergent literacies to create a safe space where they could then develop their academic literacy skills as well. So the context for this particular semester, I had 25 enabling pathway students. 4 students disclosed that they were neurospicy, their words, not mine, early in the semester. 1 with autism and ADHD, or now known as ADHD. One with autism, ADHD, dissociative disorder, and PTSD. Another with ADHD, anxiety, and depression. Mid-semester, 1 student disclosed OCD, and 2 others disclosed ADHD towards the end of semester. I had another 18 students who didn't disclose, so we may say that they engaged with the classroom in a neurotypical way. Next. So part of this action research project that I undertook was to really understand what literacy was, what the context for my project was, so the uni prep context and the enabling context. But we need to have kind of multiple understandings of the space rather than, I think, drawing from a limited pool of understanding around literacy. So literacy, this is the ACARA definition, that they develop the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to interpret and use language confidently for learning and communicating in and out of school and for participating effectively in society. So this is like a really basic, I think, definition of what we would define literacy at a very basic level is. New literacy studies kind of challenges this understanding of literacy and sees it more as a social practice, including autonomous and ideological models as well. So in terms of this model, with new literacy studies, there's the ideological model of literacy kind of falls within this. So it's the plurality of literacies that are contingent on no time and space and developed with specific purpose in mind. So this is a model that really embraces that understanding of social practice and doesn't see literacy in a technical, as a technical or a neutral skill, but is about the ways in which people address reading and writing and communication, and with that understanding that is rooted in conceptions of knowledge, identity, and being. And I think when we are considering this more nuanced approach to literacies, it can really start a bit of a paradigmatic shift or a lens shift in the way that we're viewing what it means to be literate. And I think when we're doing that at a pre-university, university level, it really, if we start to have that shift in what literacy means and how we can determine, I guess, literacy and what it means to be literate, it can help to kind of break down some barriers around understanding students' literacy and how they see literacy and embrace it. So neurodivergent literacies, and this is according to Bailey, who's probably the main runner in terms of this idea at the moment. Their work's come out in the last couple of years, that neurodivergent literacies equals the ideological model of literacy plus the concept of neurodiversity. Next. So part of this planning and part of this understanding of neurodivergent literacies is also this understanding of what neurodivergence actually means. So when we've gone through neurodiversity as a definition by Singer, there was this kind of concept of the different neurotypes and brain types. And there's, I think, neurodiversity and what it means to be neurodivergent has kind of expanded with neurodivergent was Asamoah in 2015, and Sunny Jane, who does some great work on the lived experience, has kind of formulated these ideas around neurodiversity and neurodivergent and this umbrella. So neurodivergent is diverse from dominant societal standards and recognizing that there is an overlapping of diversity under this umbrella. So, you know, there was the medicalization of neurodiversity in terms of ADHD, autism, Tourette's, but this has really expanded, I'd say, in the last 15 years, and there's this umbrella that takes into account like acquired neurodiversity through trauma, as well as anxiety, depression, PTSD, OCD. There's a huge amount that now falls under that umbrella. So if we're thinking about, you know, this umbrella of neurodivergence and we're thinking about a classroom, we can think about that in terms of diverse people, with diverse brains, not just the brains alone, with diverse learning needs often placed in an environment that has been designed for neurotypical students. So I have called this idea of embracing the brainbow. So this is where we take our diverse brains, so our neurodivergent brains, plus our neurodivergent literacies, and we put them together to create a space of engaging and supportive learning, where we can really think about who our learners are and how we can best meet those needs in a classroom. And for my context, again, that's enabling. Next. So I set out to, as part of my action research, create an action to try and best support the needs of my, not just my neurodivergent students, but all of my students within the classroom. So I started by developing a series of activities to create psychological safety and understand my learners, their passions, and their literacies. So I think I can't just talk about the model of literacy without actually talking about the importance of creating that psychological safety and that relationship in the classroom as the first step, and being really proactive in understanding that there are neurodivergent students in my classroom and you know, walking them through things like, you know, it is okay to leave the classroom without putting your hand up if you need to have sensory toys, if you need your headphones. All those things are really important to not, for students to not have to necessarily tell you, but saying, yeah, these are really embraced here already. And you know, even saying and noting what your pronouns are. Mine are she, her. I would say to students, you know, let me know what your pronouns are at the beginning of semester. And I just do a series of activities and statements to create that safe environment for my students before we even got to their passions and literacies. I created a model called the Engagement Zone back in 2016 with one of my colleagues, Anita Old, in a way to find a space of shared passion with my students. So it's a bit of a Venn diagram where I have the, you know, students' passion on one side, teacher passions on the other, and the intersection of shared passions is the engagement zone. And so I've always started there with my teaching, particularly in the enabling space. I've often drawn on a lot of popular culture, but generally a piece of popular culture that I've shared with the class to help with the acculturation from being, I guess, what we would refer to as cultural outsiders to cultural insiders into the university setting. So I've always found that, you know, pop culture has been a really good place for me to start. And I kind of went, well, what happens if rather than just having a generic piece of pop culture or a genre of music that I've used, that we actually create a nuanced approach to that. And so for this particular class, we collected memes and songs at an individual level focusing on, you know, their loves and their passions. So say music and animals, and I have labelled this, and was not at the time, I labelled this afterwards, the passion pot. So the passion pot, which there's an image of a screen on the screen here of a pot labelled passion pot that is exploding with instruments and sporting equipment and animals. There is a lot of dogs in there, and I don't know, this was generated by ChatGPT. So I don't know if it was alluding to my absolute love of dogs, but the idea behind this was to really find those pieces of individual pop culture and passions. Didn't have to be pop culture. There was some readings. There were, you know, students that were really into. I had one student that was really into mushrooms, and other students that were, you know, into other kinds of plants and cooking and things like that. But it was just finding that currency for those particular students. So that was kind of one piece of the puzzle. Then I developed a PowerPoint that focused on the learning intention for a particular academic literacy with explicit instructions. So for every academic literacy that I was teaching or skill that I was teaching, was a really strong intention to make it as explicit in the instruction as possible and include multiple modes. So that might have been bullet points and a diagram, obviously my spoken word, but then a video with captions. We take a really UDL approach to the creation of our learning materials as well. Next. So the example that I'm going to walk you through today was teaching academic reading. So again, this was teaching it in a learning skills unit, and academic reading is one of the, I guess, first skills that they learn in this unit, because it is something that is used in other units as well in the enabling program, and a skill that is really, you know, can take some time to hone. So the way that I tackled teaching the academic reading was I used multiple ways: diagrams, text, pictures, oral explanation to explain the context, breaking down the elements of an academic reading. So what we read, so that scholarly texts are written with a particular structure and voice, why we need to read. So the context, again, within an academic environment, to gather data for a particular academic purpose. So that might be for summarizing purposes, for an assignment purposes, for an oral presentation, but really articulating that the reason why we read within an academic context might be different to ways that they have read in the past, and how we read. And again, the context within academia, with intention, framed by questions, looking for particular attributes, and using a method that we are going to discover together in class. So really getting the students to be a part of what it meant to develop this literacy for them. And then this led to the return to the passion pot. And why this led to the return to the passion pot was that I had a number of students that were particularly the students that had disclosed autism, that were really finding academic reading challenging, and the context or the examples were journal articles that they were being asked to read. And we had these really authentic and rigorous discussions about what it was, what they were bumping up against in terms of these journal articles. Was it the language? Was it the structure? Was it the content? And when we were talking about that kind of I guess, the intersectional and the layered challenges that were that some of these students were facing. And a particular student that was convinced and that it was the autism that was the only reason that they could not read these academic readings. And we actually walk through that academic readings and journal articles in particular are very challenging for any student that is coming across them for the first time, because there is so many layers of cultural context and disciplinary context in these readings. And then we got to a point, once we had kind of started to peel away that layer of that barrier, to go, well, actually, it's just really boring. It's actually really, I'm not interested at all in understanding what this reading is about. Now, the purpose of this learning skills unit, again, is to teach academic reading. So this is what sparked the return to the passion pot, or at the time, it was just their own lists of their passions and skills that they had. And so one of the particular, this particular students, their passion was dogs. And so we took a different journal article that was on dogs. And once we started to understand the elements of the academic reading, we then moved back to the unit's academic reading. So the aim was really to start to identify those skills, that those different elements that were in an academic reading. So, for example, what an abstract was, what a thesis statement was, the like topic sentences, supporting arguments, references, all those different elements that make up a journal article. And by using the journal article on dogs, we could start to kind of bypass the disciplinary language, because I had buy-in. It was a passion of theirs. So they were really interested in reading about the dogs. So then we could start to find the actual structural elements of the reading. So once we moved back to the academic reading, I modeled the process again. And this is what I refer to as creating those cognitive pegs, so that we could find those same patterns within the reading, because we'd done it already in the reading that they were passionate about. So then the next step is there's a need to really develop a way to demonstrate the literacy as well. So I asked the student to then repeat the process using a unit reading and their preferred choice of communication method. So we didn't jump straight to having to communicate this in a written way, which eventually they might have to do in, say, a summary or something like that. But, I said, you can draw it out, you can write it out, you can speak it out. I stopped short at interpretive dance, but it was a way to be able to have that embraced understanding of neurodivergent literacies, and going, well, what's your knowledge, what's your identity, what's your being, how can you show me that you've understood what is in this, and giving that autonomy, that individualized learning experience was really, really helpful for the students. Next. So in terms of my research project, this action research was to reflect on my own pedagogies for teaching this academic literacy. So my reflections really are autoethnographic reflections. So spending time in understanding the learners created strong trust and relationship. And while it took time to create the passion pot and create my list of those different passions and different interests for those students, it was really useful for teaching academic literacies, particularly for the academic reading. But then I did refer to it like it was good to be able to draw back to that and go, remember when we're unpacking that academic reading, we found what a thesis statement was. Okay, well, now we're going to write our own thesis statement. What's an area that you're really interested in? Like, let's draw from that, and we'll create a thesis statement around that first. So some literacies took longer than others to develop. And I recognise a real need to have an awareness of student processing time. So my time for what I wanted to do in a classroom didn't necessarily match the processing time of the students. So there was some dancing around that, and that just required me to be, I guess, open and fluid in terms of moving different elements across different weeks, and understanding that it was going to take some weeks to maybe teach a skill that I thought maybe I would have crossed in 1 week. So while I drew on a number of multiple literacies and passions to teach academic literacies, I needed a clear process to stick to, so that we didn't just get stuck in the land of passions and spending, you know, hours talking about dogs and music. So my next step was to create a model or cycle, and then think about how I could apply this model in other units. Next. So this is what I created: the Brainbro Toolkit for Inclusive Practice. So starting with our practitioner and student understanding of students, so learning styles and preference. And while learning styles, you know, can be quite a controversial conversation to have, I know from my own lived experience working with neurodivergent students that there often is a preference, and it can be really useful to start with that preference when teaching literacies. So our neurodivergent literacies, so hyperfixations, passions, skills and knowledge, we can use those to create cognitive pegs if we understand what they are, have an awareness of processing time, and create the passion pot. Then next we move to our practitioner to provide the context, so the what, the why and the how, explicit instruction and multiple ways of explaining. Then we move to step 3, the student and practitioner together. So using the passion pot, the practitioner models and links to neurodivergent literacies, and then students engage with the skills using the passion pot and neurodivergent literacies. Number 4, student and practitioner again, identify attributes of the academic literacy that they're seeking to develop, relate it back to the unit-specific academic or disciplinary context, and that will allow them to create a new cognitive peg. Now, I think here there is some movement back and forth between 4 and 3. It's not always just simply moving around, and that's okay. Having that understanding that there can be a dance between the two is a really important part of this cycle and model. And finally, the student can demonstrate that academic literacy given multiple ways to demonstrate that literacy, and that's a real UDL approach as well. Next. So besides the model, I have some additional tips for universal design for learning approach for curriculum and pedagogy. So embracing the Brainbro, so multiple ways of explaining and presenting information, making sure that it's simple and not overwhelming, that there's a conscious choice of colours and contrast when presenting. And we were just having a little conversation earlier about, you know, having the black screen and the white font. In my classes, I would share multiple versions of my slides, and those slides were decluttered, but then had the different ways of explaining and also different colour combinations too. Really knowing your learners is so important as part, particularly within the enabling environment. I would say all learning environments, but when you have these, you're the first entry into the university for students from these underrepresented backgrounds, it's so important to be able to create that psychological and physical safety for your students in that environment without making it a trauma dump as well. So having those really strong boundaries, but having that safety as well. And when I say physical safety in the classroom, I don't just mean it's like a physically safe environment that, you know, no harm is going to come to them. I actually mean that the structure of the classroom is safe for them to move around as well. And part of that for a lot of my students was keeping the classroom the same layout every time we had the tutorial. Often they'd get, the seats would get moved around, but creating that room that had that familiarity and the same kind of seating and the same structure was really important for their physical safety, for them to be physically and then psychologically safe as well. Next. And then adding to your toolkit, I've probably put this in about 5 times or so in this presentation, but that being conscious of your explicit instruction and your multiple ways of explaining is so important. Having that understanding of classroom dynamics and management. So, you know, you don't get stuck just having those conversations about passions, that actually you're moving. You know, we are here at the end of the day, you know, in a learning skills unit to teach these learning skills to transition to university. So we can't just stay in that land forever. We do need to transition across. And that's that we sometimes need to move from those group conversations to those one-to-one, which may happen in the classroom or outside of the classroom. Being really clear on communication, being aware of communication. So I've had to model a lot of turn taking and meter the impulsivity in the classroom. And so creating that psychological safety. And we have some classroom, I wouldn't call them rules, but like just a structure of respect at the beginning of, for us it's a semester, is also very useful for encouraging that positive communication and communicating respectfully. And then just in terms of our videos, pre-watching them for the sound levels and making sure that there are captions on there as well, and providing any warnings if there is going to be, we've had some videos before that were the sound jumped around or it was a bit glitchy, so just warning students that that might happen as well. Next. So that's it from me in terms of sharing my model for inclusivity in the neurodivergent classroom. So I will open the floor now for questions. Thanks, Darlene.
Thank you, Ange. Well, stop sharing. So there we go, and then I get access to the questions. So if anybody's got any questions for Angela, please add that to the Q&A. Encourage you to kind of ask questions, and if you want to kind of more chat, to go into the chat. But the feedback and yeah, it's probably, it was great. You were very concentrated on your presentation because I think you would have got very distracted by the chat because there was so much
I saw
love.
some popping up and I was like, no, don't get. I was like,
don't go there.
Don't go there.
But you certainly got a lot of love. Look, I think yeah, the presentation was, yeah, I think, you know, you demonstrated what you do within your teaching, and it was absolutely amazing. And you know, I kind of said it's groundbreaking, but it shouldn't. It should be just, you know, what we all expect within our learning environment. So it was absolutely wonderful. So if anybody got any questions for Ange, please feel free to write it into the Q&A. Sorry.
I did have one question when I took this to STARS, which I thought was, you know, a question that I would share with everyone because, you know, it was a good question, which was, how can this be applied to the disciplines? So for me, you know, I'm in the space of teaching learning skills, so it is very much, I do have that space to do that. And I think it would be trickier, you know, to apply this approach. I don't think it's impossible. I think it would just take some time. And I think that's the thing that a lot of academics don't have, is that time to actually dedicate to creating their passion pot in the classroom.
Yeah. And look, time is, yeah, it's one of the challenges. I think every time, you know, you talk to an academic, and probably most people within the sector, we all feel very time poor and pushed in so many ways. But it's that kind of sometimes false economy, because sometimes you may kind of save time too in actually doing that well at the beginning and actually understanding your students better and having, you know, developing that confidence in them that may kind of end up saving time for you.
I think so. It's saving time in the future as well. That's what I think, not just in my classroom, but in future classrooms. That's what I'm preparing those students as part of their acculturation journey. And for me, it's developing that social emotional learning as well.
So there is a question. So do you have advice for online synchronous experiences such as Zoom or Team session, and how to make them safe and encourage participation?
I think a lot of what I said in setting up your classroom and the question, being proactive in telling students, again, your pronouns, that it's a safe space, like literally saying this is a safe space. We have lots of neurodivergent brains in the classroom today, or, you know, lots of diverse, you don't even have to say neurodivergent brains, you can say diverse brains and minds and people in the classroom, and we're here together, like on this respectful journey. If I set up a system for one of our online students that they had they use an emoji system for when they didn't understand something, and so they would put, like, in the chat, they would put an emoji in there, and then that was the key for me to give a different kind of explanation for it. So kind of like the cards that you can put on the desk, it worked. So it's just creating the same, going, well, how can I create that but in a digital environment? Having your recordings, having your captions available, reminding, like you did at the beginning, Darlene, of how they can access those captions. Having those transcripts, and then creating that space to say, you know, you can ask me questions after the session, but if you don't feel comfortable asking in that environment, that we can have a conversation later. And being conscious of your colours with your presentations in that online environment, like having multiple colours or multiple examples on the screen just can be really distracting as well. Like my slides, you see, I try to keep it very clear and very plain, just so for multiple reasons, like that can be read by a screen reader, that I can also change the colours when I'm providing that as a resource, that it's not a laborious, just a laborious process of having to change the colours, like, and go, okay, it's now taking me an extra 20 minutes to do that. So creating those processes for yourself, and I think creating those same kind of structures for your online presentation so that they know what they're getting each week creates that safety as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Another question was, did the neurotypical students all react positively?
I would say that, so what happened was quite a beautiful experience in the fact that it brought the neurodivergent students really out of their shell in terms of communicating. So you'll see in some of the tips that I put at the end around turn taking and impulsivity, what that did mean is that there was some very passionate conversations that then came out that got, at times quite overwhelming in the classroom, even as a educator. And, we also know neurodivergent students have varying needs. They don't have all the same needs. So, an ADHD student that's particularly loud is, for every ADHD student's particularly loud and wants to have those conversations. There's others that are, a little more introverted and need the quiet time and need the blinkers on. So I think to expand that question, I think majority of once we got that balance right in the class, the students enjoyed it, but there was a few weeks there where I think that it wasn't just the neurotypical students that were finding some of it like frustrating or a different environment. It was some of the neurodivergent students as well that was like, this is a bit much. Like, so it was about that classroom management again, going, okay, well, we've opened it up now, let's put some boundaries around there as well.
So further Yeah, to further to that, somebody's asked a question around, can you give some examples of some respectful redirection when moving from passion to content and so forth?
I think putting some timings around it is really important. So it's like, okay, well, putting that, or we're going to be talking about this for, 5 minutes and then we're moving on. So it's actually, rather than having a reactive approach, it's having that proactive approach of putting the timings in place. And then if we're respectfully, what I refer to as parking it, is be like, I'm really interested in what you have to say, and we can talk about this a little bit more later, but now we just need to move on because we know that we've got this particular activity that we need to move on to now. Generally, though, I would also have it on my PowerPoint that we have really clear steps of what we're moving to. So again, it's that explicit instruction, and then going and you have it on the screen. I'd say it at the beginning of my class, and then we're walking through it. So we're returning back to it. So there's safety in that knowledge as well, that we're in it together, but we've also got an agenda that we need to kind of move through.
Yep, no, that's great. Now, one of the questions too was, is it the framework, is there a publication on this that's available for the public?
On my model, only what I presented at STARS, so I have it in a poster, but I'm happy to share the model. I will be writing it up as a paper, but yeah, as an advocate for social justice education, I really like to share things. So it's more important that if you want it, you can have it to share with your, in your classroom and give it a go and let me know how it goes. I'd love to, hear feedback on how it works as well.
Excellent. We might add that to our presentation page, if that's okay, and put your email there. And yeah,
it'll be in the slides too.
Yep, that'd be great. Also, as someone asked about the what, how data and evidence that analyses part of your action research approach. Is there data available, or?
So in the conclusions, so my analysis was my autoethnographic reflections, because I did it as a one for me rather than focused on the students. For me, it was about the process. But I'm happy to chat more about that if anyone wants to talk through that.
Excellent.
So there was another question in there that I saw from Marzen. Do you have any tips for when we meet students for the first time for a learner support appointment?
Oh, I missed that one.
That's okay. It caught my mind. It caught my eye just because I was literally been having this conversation this week. I'm actually designing a workshop for learning advisors. I'd just say be conscious if you know neurodivergent behavior and you're aware of it, that and that can be all sorts of different kinds of things, but just to not judge, to actually have a conversation. And that might start with what are you really interested in, and then what I find is that creates that relationship and a safety there, rather than sometimes people can be walled off by behavior or presence or non-eye contact, or an intensity or an anxiety around it. And if you can hold and emotionally regulate yourself in those first meetings, and then you can have those conversations and you can find those interests, I think that's the way that you can connect and create a really positive relationship there before you jump into your learners, like whatever I don't know if that learner support is academic or a pastoral, but either way, I think that connection and that safety is so important.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, thank you, Ange. I'll wrap it up now. We will just put into the chat a link to a survey. We always value everybody's feedback. In that survey, we also ask for other ideas, but I think people have, been blown away. And it's great to hear of the model and how you've approached your teaching. I wish I was you were my first teacher. I might have gone further into academia than I did. It's absolutely fabulous, Ange, and your students are so fortunate to have you, and hopefully you've influenced a number of us today to think about how we teach and how we engage in our students. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Darlene, and thank you everybody for having me. I'm obviously quite passionate about this, but anybody wants to reach out after and have further chats, happy to help.
Excellent. Normally at this time, I tell you which webinar we've got coming up next. We actually are not having any at the moment. We haven't got any planned, but we hope in the next week or two to release our series on the UDL symposium we did 3 months ago. We'll be making them public. We made them available for those who were able to pay and attend, but they will become publicly available in the next week or two. If you want to keep up to date with all the up and coming things of ADCET, we put the link into our newsletter. So please sign up to that. And thank you all for attending. It's absolutely brilliant, and have a great day all. Take care.